Our lesson this morning is taken from Ruth, chapter 3. Ruth and Boaz at the threshing floor. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law had told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men." "You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl that you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came home to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Nick. There we go. So, we come to the end of this amazing story of Ruth and Naomi. Last week, James told you that I love a rom-com. And I do. I'm not ashamed. I'm very happy to tell you that I do. He mentioned that, like any good story, this story of Ruth, has a crisis point that comes really early on. Happens to come almost immediately in this story. And then the rest of it is about that upward arc, that hitting rock bottom and then that upward arc of things beginning to go better. And in this story, that happens time and time again by a series of coincidences. And I say coincidences because, of course, in a world where they believed that God was completely in charge, of course, there were no coincidences. Sir William Temple is rumoured to have famously said, "When I pray, coincidences happen. When I don't, they don't." But there are lots of coincidences in this story. Situations where the timing is just right and people bump into each other at the most opportune moment. And this book reminds us of the way that God has been and will be faithful to his people. That he will act for our good, to achieve his good purposes in the world, even through hard times, even through struggles and difficulties. And yet, there's more for us here than that. And particularly, I think there's more, particularly in this later part of the book, there's more to challenge us than that. So I pray that God will minister to us this morning and that he would challenge us and that we would respond in faith. So firstly, I think this whole book, and perhaps especially these last 2 chapters, challenge us about integrity. A couple of weeks ago when we were thinking about chapter 1, Mark spoke for us and he highlighted, didn't he? You'll all remember, that the context of this story is that it all happens during the time of the judges, in the time that the judges ruled. That's the very beginning of chapter 1 of Ruth. And only a very cursory look at the book of Judges tells us that this period was not a high point in the life of Israel. Morality and virtue were not high on most people's agenda. The final verse of Judges says, "Everyone did as he saw fit." And yet, as we read the book of Ruth, we're confronted by 3 people who are not doing as they see fit. They are very much doing as God would have them do. Ruth gives up her home and her people to walk alongside Naomi, to covenant with Naomi, to go with her, to follow her, to serve her God, even though the prospects aren't good, even though it would have made way more sense for her to stay at home with her own people and her own family. Then we meet this chap Boaz, who, rather than merely tolerating the presence of Ruth on his land as she gleaned, we heard about that last week, didn't we? That she was there to collect the bits that were left behind. And he needed to tolerate that because it was part of God's law. But he did more than tolerate that. He gave her extra. He left extra behind at every turn. He did what he could to bless her. He actually told his harvesters to leave stuff so that she could pick it up. And he told his workers to protect her so that she wouldn't be prey to the sexual abuse and the physical abuse that would surely have been happening all over the place. Not because there was anything in it for him, just because it was the right thing to do. And then, of course, today's reading opens with Naomi saying to Ruth, "It's time I found you a husband." Now, the easy route for Naomi would have been to leave things as they were. She was doing quite well. There was a good supply of food coming in via Ruth's gleaning and Boaz's kindness. They certainly weren't going to starve. And yet Naomi recognises that her young friend has a life that she needs to live. And she has her own needs. And so she tells her that there's this chap who is her kinsman redeemer. Now, it's worth thinking a little bit about what a kinsman redeemer is. A kinsman redeemer in Jewish thinking is a male relative who had the responsibility to step in and help the family should there be a crisis, should there be a need, or should someone be in danger. They could buy back property if part of the family had fallen into debt. They could marry a male relative's widow if he had died young. And we see this in the Old Testament. We see this all the way through actually into the New Testament. There's a little interaction between Jesus and some of the Pharisees that were asking him what his view of this was. But if a man had married his brother's wife, in the life to come, who would this woman be married to? So obviously it was a practice that still happened later on, way into the New Testament. If you want to read more about this, you can check out Leviticus 25. You can check out Luke 20, just for your homework later on. But this was something that Naomi knew could happen and should happen in this culture, Because, of course, as a widowed woman, as a single woman, the prospects were poor. And this aspect of culture and custom had been put into the law to make life better, in theory, for women, so that they would be provided for, so that they would be okay. But it wasn't without risk, of course. This plan for Ruth to make herself known to Boaz and to propose, in effect, could have backfired completely. It could have put an end to this very, very favourable grain situation that Naomi was enjoying. And for Ruth, of course, this was an incredibly risky endeavour. I don't know how you read this encounter on the threshing floor. Ruth turns up in her good clothes with perfume to a room full of drunk men. And she's effectively asked to throw herself at the feet of this man in the dead of night. We like to read this story as a romance. We like to, like James was saying last week, we somehow put on our rose-tinted rom-com glasses when we turn to this book. But do you know what? I think if we suspend those for a second and imagine sending our own daughters into this scenario, it quickly becomes not so pleasant. This is risky. This is no place for a young woman. Let's remember this wasn't her culture. This wasn't even her people. She's just doing what Naomi tells her to do because she trusts Naomi and she's committed herself to go the way Naomi asks her to go. I'm a little fascinated by the way we love to romanticise this book. Maybe because it's easier to do that. It's easier to make it into a love story. And, with a few tweaks, it could be a love story. And, maybe Boaz does hold a candle for her. Maybe he's absolutely delighted when he turns over and they're like, oh, it's Ruth. Maybe there's nothing there at all. Because it's not about that. It's not about them falling in love. It's about them doing what they were supposed to do. It's about taking their responsibilities. It's about doing what's right for your family and for your people. I wonder sometimes we romanticise these things because it's easier for us to do that than to actually consider the grim reality for women at this time. Over the last few years, with the horrific murders of Sarah Everard and others, there have been all sorts of conversations, haven't there, about how women should behave to keep themselves safe. And we could have many conversations about that, about the reasonableness of asking women to modify their behaviour rather than asking men to examine the way they behave in a way which makes women feel threatened. We could talk about whether it's right to tell our young women not to walk home alone at night and let the men's behaviour go unchecked, which is meaning it's not safe for them to do that. We seem to have a habit of accepting injustices which are done to women. And that makes me very sad and actually a little bit angry. It didn't just happen in the ancient world. It happens now. And thankfully, Boaz is a good man. That's the point here. Once again, he behaves with the utmost integrity and honour towards Ruth. Nothing untoward takes place, and in fact he takes great care to protect her reputation and her dignity. In the morning he makes sure that nobody sees anything and assumes anything has gone on, and then he sends Ruth home with a huge amount of food so that her and Naomi can have a good meal. But let's be clear, this situation would have been repeated on countless occasions by countless desperate women and far less scrupulous men. And I don't think I need to spell it out for you. We need to not be ignorant of the biblical world that we romanticise. This only ends well because Boaz is a man of integrity. And his integrity goes further. He says that he's a relative of Elimelech, Ruth's father-in-law, and Naomi's husband who has died, and that as such he would be happy to redeem the family land and property and to take on the responsibility for Ruth and for the family. But he says, actually, there's another closer relative. So I need to go to him and I need to find out whether he wants to do this, because it's It's his call. It's his choice first as the closer relative. And if he says he wants to, then that's fine. But if he doesn't want to marry you, then I will, says Boaz. His integrity is such that he needs to do it properly. He needs to check out what is his or not his to redeem before he does so. It's quite refreshing, isn't it? Boaz is refreshing. We hear so many stories of people in this day and age doing the wrong thing, or worse, maybe, doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. We hear of politicians coming clean of their past misdemeanours, supposedly because they want to do the right thing. But then we hear they have a book they want to publicise. Or that actually there's a far worse scandal in the past, and they want to fill up our news cycle with this minor scandal so that we don't ever get to hear about the even worse one that they're covering up. In this age of fake news, we always have to question what we're hearing and why we're hearing it now. Which leaves us crying out for something truer and richer than that. An integrity that does the right thing because it's the right thing, not because there's something in it for us or because it will benefit us in some other way. It's not only politicians that struggle with this. This is not a politician bashing session. We all do it. We do it maybe in our spiritual lives fairly often. How much easier is it to go through the motions of prayer and worship when we're all together here on a Sunday morning than when we're on our own at home? How much easier is it to turn up here because people will miss us if we don't and they'll notice, than it is to worship God in the quietness at home where there's nobody to see? How much more readily do we help a neighbour if we know that other people are going to hear about it? How much do we like to share things for prayer, but actually we like the fact that people know that we know what's going on in the life of this person and that therefore that we can be trusted? I could go on. This isn't a new problem. In the book of James, we read of him counselling his readers that maybe they don't see their prayers answered because they asked with the wrong motives, and that their faith is worthless if their deeds don't back it up. And I just wonder if there are any areas of your life this morning where God is calling you to have more integrity, or to look at your motives for doing what you do. Only you know, you and God. You know what your motives are, and you know why you're doing it, and you know why you're not doing it if you're not doing it. It's something to talk about with you and God. That's the first point. Are there any places that God is asking you to have more integrity? Because the example of Ruth and Boaz and Naomi is clear. They do the right thing because it's the right thing. Because they love God and they love others. Any other motive is out of place in the kingdom of God. But secondly, I think these chapters have a lot to say about the implications of that integrity, lived out in the everyday situations we find ourselves in. Let me explain. We know that the integrity shown by our three characters allowed God to work in their lives, right? In chapter 4, although we didn't read it this morning, we did read it the other day, we know that Boaz goes to see that nearer relative, and the nearer relative declines the opportunity to take Ruth as his wife or to marry. I know I just said that. Or to take Elimelech's property. He says he doesn't want that. So Ruth and Boaz get married. Hooray, we all say. And in no time at all, Ruth gives birth to a son. Despite being childless for 10 years in Moab, she seemingly, in no time, conceives a child with Boaz. And in that, Naomi's life is completely turned around. From here on, the future was bright for Naomi. It was a disaster to not have any heirs in this culture. She needed people to come after her, to look after her. And the change in Naomi is obvious. We can compare chapter 1 with chapter 4. We hear her in chapter 1 say, "Don't call me Naomi," which meant pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. Because my life is so bad. Because God has brought me back empty. She's in this awful dark place. And then by the end of chapter 4, Naomi took her grandchild in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. The empty, bitter Naomi is replaced by a tender, loving grandmother, Naomi. The birth of Obed radically changed her prospects, and it radically changed her heart. And we know, don't we, that without Ruth's faithfulness, or chesed is the word in Hebrew, without Ruth committing herself to walk with Naomi, even though it didn't make sense, without the upright actions of all three of the characters in this story, that wouldn't have happened. That wouldn't have been the outcome. Naomi wouldn't have been there blessed by a grandson if those three had not done what was right at the right time. God was able to use the integrity of these three to bring about an amazing change of circumstances. But of course, it all goes further than Naomi's lifetime. It goes further than Ruth's lifetime, because the genealogy at the end of chapter 4 reminds us that Obed became the father of Jesse, and Jesse, of course, was the father of David. King David. David who became king of Israel. The man who wrote all those beautiful psalms. The man who is described as being a man after God's own heart. And of course, who is an ancestor of Jesus himself. What amazing implications. What amazing ripple effect we see going on here. From the tiny, seemingly, I guess at the time, insignificant decisions made by these three individuals comes an amazing, lasting impact for Israel, and of course, even for us. Even later on. When we live with integrity, when our actions are guided by love of God and love of others, when we manage to display that deep chesed, that kindness and steadfast love that we see in this story, it will have long-lasting implications in the purposes of God. Remember that all this that we're talking about is set in the backdrop of God's providence, God's sovereignty. So I'm not saying if we're all jolly nice people we can change the world, because frankly that's what we hear, isn't it, all the time in culture. It's all about being my best me, it's about being my best self, I can do anything, I can move mountains, I'm invincible, I'm amazing. That's not what this story teaches us. This story teaches us that God is in control, but that when we let him, when we behave in a way which honours and glorifies him, then he can do amazing things through our lives. And we won't know necessarily. Ruth and Naomi didn't know where this was going to lead. But in the purposes of God, he was able to bring about amazing things because of them. We praise God that he does know what he's going to do with our lives, what he's going to do with our decisions, with our faithfulness, with our day-to-day faithfulness. He knows what he's going to do with that. It's like he's weaving a tapestry, isn't it? And we can only see the underside, the messy side, where there's ends and bits and stuff. But he's weaving this beautiful picture from the top, and he can see it. He can see it all in perfect clarity. He knows exactly what he's doing. And you know, for some of us, we're going to have an ending like Naomi had. It's all going to come right. It's all going to come together. God's going to do something amazing with our difficult situation. Even difficult as it is now, he's going to turn it around, and he's going to bring that resolution and that redemption. Now, in this life, we're going to see it. Some of us, let's be honest, we won't have such a beautiful, perfect ending. We might not get that rom-com ending. But we can praise God that redemption has come and will come to us in Jesus Christ. Even if we don't see our earthly circumstances changing, even if we're not there holding an Obed at the end of the story as the credits roll, That doesn't mean Jesus isn't redeeming us. That doesn't mean he's not going to make everything right. Because in Jesus Christ we are redeemed, restored, brought back, forgiven, accepted into his family, secure, whole. We are recipients of that amazing love because of Jesus, who, let's remember, was an ancestor of King David. So like Ruth, I pray today that you would discover the faithfulness and the mercy of Naomi's God. His gift of life, his joy, his hope. That you would know that in Jesus you are loved and saved from now to eternity. And that you'd give your life and your heart to him, even now, even today, if you've never done it. Give your heart to Jesus. Say, redeem me, take me back, take me into your family. I want to be yours. It will change everything. And I pray that like Boaz, you would be people of integrity. People who do the right thing because it's the right thing. Because you love God and love your neighbour. And let's be people who take that long view. Who remember that God will do amazing things with our lives, both in our lifetime and beyond, if only we'll let him. We're going to be quiet for just a minute now and let God speak to us. And after that, we're going to sing a song which is about offering our lives to God, to let him use them and make them whatever he sees fit.